Hey, welcome back to Soma Psyche. Thanks for joining us for our last videos of this series where we've been talking about the different ways of knowing, and particularly the ways of knowing that emerge from our bodies and then go to our brains. So we've talked about interoception, our internal sense of our own world inside, exteroception, the world out here, proprioception, how we manage the space between those two. We talked about felt sense, which again was its own video series on focusing. Totally recommend you going and watching that if you haven't yet. We talked about neuroception as well, threat in the environment, ways our body knows that. Today we're going to talk about a word called intercorporeality, which has a lot of syllables and a lot of, it sounds very fancy, but we're going to break it down so that it's very understandable because it has a wealth of meaning. So do you want to, Melissa, give us kind of like a teaser as to, if we were going to break down the word intercorporeality, what does that really mean?
So I think, there's sort of three parts to that word. And while this isn't exactly a perfect breakdown of what those letters all mean, it's a way of remembering, right? So we'll go backwards.
Okay.
So the reality of bodies together, right? So the reality of bodies.
I've never heard you say that, but I love it. It's such an easy way.
Well, sometimes you just need a hook to help your brain hold on to these really complex concepts that hold so much. And intercorporeality comes from phenomenology, which is another big old fancy word, which a simplistic explanation of phenomenology is the experiences, the experiential stuff of life.
Yeah, the study of experience.
Yes, the study of experience and the ways that we have experience, interpret experience, communicate experience, all of that. And so intercorporeality was introduced by one of the main phenomenologists in the Western world called Merleau-Ponty.
Good old French philosopher.
Yes. And he was writing in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And in 1965, he introduced this concept of intercorporeality. And he'd kind of been building up to it in all of his previous work and really exploring what it meant to be an embodied consciousness, right? This difficulty that we have. He was really investigating the problem of mind, right? What is mind? How does consciousness exist in a flesh and blood organism? Which, by the way, that conversation is ongoing and nobody has a definitive answer yet. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because to do so would be ahead of where the science actually is. We can't locate where consciousness is.
Yeah.
But one thing that we do know, and the world of somatics is very focused on, is that whatever consciousness is, it is dependent on our physical reality. That without a body, there is no consciousness. Yeah. And, it's not the time nor the place to try to explain why we know that to be true. But I think experientially, we understand that the way that our body feels on a given day has everything to do with how we experience our consciousness. A very easy example is when you're sick, you're in an altered state of consciousness. When you are sleep deprived, you are in an altered state of consciousness.
When you're hungry.
When you're
Which is the one that was sticking out to me.
That's so real for you.
Different human. If I'm hungry,
I know.
I'm different.
I know. Your relationship with your hunger signals is highly tuned because it really matters to your experience of yourself.
My interoceptive awareness of my stomach matters.
Powerful.
Yes.
I think I have a relationship to sleep the way that you do with hunger. It's really important to me.
Yeah.
I track it very closely. But the point of that is that we have these everyday reminders that the way we experience self in the world is incredibly dependent on how the flesh of us is doing, feeling, functioning, etc. And that doesn't stop at those everyday experiences. That is the reality of what it means to be a human organism, from cell all the way to the most cosmic levels of understanding of our experience as a human being. So I think to try to kind of put some bookends on where we want to position this conversation, I want to talk about the very minute for just a moment, and then the grand scale of things for a moment, And then we're going to situate intercorporeality where we live most of our lives and where we do our work as therapists, which is body to body with two human beings.
Yeah.
Or with a
in
group
a very
of human
specific setting.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
we've cultured that in a certain way, and
Yes.
that matters to our bodies.
So much,
Yeah.
so much. So what I would begin with is that all the way from cells' relationship to other cells, and I mean that literally, that's not a metaphor, and then up to what we would call, how does nature, meaning everything that is alive on this planet, coordinate itself? Because it is coordinated. Things like weather patterns and shifts in climate, etc. All of that is coordinated, right? And so how does that happen? And at least a part of the answer is that on the most microscopic and the most cosmic scale, everything is interdependent with each other. There is not a singular actor, a singular thing. There is not, really, there's no such thing as an individual.
Yeah, or like an essence.
Yes.
We were just talking about a book that we've both been reading of. The author talks about, a shift in science away from trying to find the essence of something,
Right.
into recognizing that literally everything is contingent upon like its surrounding, its context, and shifting away from what's the essence of an individual.
Right.
It's, well, you'd have to look at the individual's context to know the individual. But then if the context changes, the individual changes.
Yes.
Even the cell changes if it's in a different place in the body.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. And so at the most microscopic, the way that intercorporeality is first manifest in a human organism is with the undifferentiated cells of an embryo, right? Where we start as this little cell blob, right? And there's not very many cells yet, but they're, multiplying all the time. But before they become anything, they are undifferentiated life potential, meaning everything is held within an individual cell to be any cell in the entire human body. That's what a stem cell is, right? And we do not know how individual cells decide to become a brain cell and become a neuron or a muscle fiber. We don't know how that process happens. We know that it does happen, and with and with tremendous efficiency, right? A part of the answer that we can get close to is that it has something to do with the other cells around that cell, right? Now, how does that original little clump of cells determine that, okay, I'm going to go over here and be a nose cell, you're going to stay here and be a gut tube cell? That's the part that is just a total mystery. But once differentiation begins, if you take a stem cell, an undifferentiated cell, and you place it in contact with, in relationship with a differentiated cell, that undifferentiated cell will respond, will understand the nature of that other cell and become like it, right? Or differentiate to be the cell that is needed right next to it, right? So if you think about weird videos that you've seen where they like grow a human ear on the back of a rat, have you ever seen this?
No.
YouTube it, it's totally there, I promise.
Sounds like a horror film, but I'm open to it.
It is pretty creepy. But the point is that you can take these undifferentiated cells and place them in a life-supporting context and watch them do their thing. But even, for instance, in a clump of cells that will become an ear, they don't all do the exact same thing. Because an ear has a very particular shape and a very particular function, and each of those cells along the way has to be responding to the cell next to it to become the next needed thing, right? Which is just like miraculous to really consider what is going on and how little we understand how that process of formation happens. For this purpose, what is really important is to understand that at the most granular microscopic level of life, the cellular level, our relationship to each other is the thing that determines what we will be. There is no such thing as a cell deciding what it will be in isolation. It is always in relationship to other life. So that happens on the most granular, and we also see it happen on the most macro. When we look at life as a whole, as an ecosystem, right? Organisms work together. There's an example of this kind of bacteria that Actually, it's an amoeba. It's a single cell organism, and it lives in soil. And for the most part, it's a solitary amoeba. It goes about its life doing its own thing. But if the environment begins to change and the amoeba begins to starve, it sends out chemical signals into the soil. And these little amoebas will clump together and make a slug. And the amoebas will band together for this specific purpose of survival and turn into a little amoeba slug that now looks like an animal, looks like an organism, and it will travel to a place where there's more nutrients, right? Because for an amoeba to make the journey to a different place by itself would be really, really difficult. But if we all, if they all come together and now create a new kind of life form, it can now respond to the changes in its environment and get what it needs over there. Right. And so once again, from the most microscopic to the most simplistic forms of life and to the most macro, we see this deep embeddedness and interdependence. And it's not about us just responding to each other. It's about us co-creating what it means to be what we are together.
Yeah. I almost feel like you can't overstate how important what you're saying is. Like,
I feel like I'm like, is everybody getting this?
Yeah. The line
like of how important this is.
Of like every individual is like dependent on its relationships, and you don't have anything without some sort of relationship to everything else.
Yes.
That, like, even thinking the slug metaphor is just a good metaphor for a healthy community.
Yeah.
Like these individuals who are doing their best with what they have. Seek to find safety and connection. It's so easily templated onto therapy language.
Yes.
Safety and connection to go and do more than they couldn't do themselves, which then creates a health for the community. They create something different. An amoeba is not a slug, and a slug isn't just one amoeba, but they're together something different. To me, in therapy, this is the beauty of, as a therapist, one, working with individual clients, but then also seeking for those individuals to learn enough about their relationality to then go and shift relationships outside of the therapy office. So then they're creating a new slug that allows them to heal even beyond what we can do individually for 1 hour a week.
And I think just so practically, this kind of conversation is incredibly relevant because in our culture, we're a bit fixated on this idea of I should be able to give myself everything that I need to be mentally, emotionally, psychologically healthy. I should be able to love myself enough, to take care of myself enough that I'm not needy or dependent on somebody else, right? There's this fixation on individuation as a reaction to unhealthy codependency and enmeshment. And the pendulum has swung way too far because it is beyond where our biology actually exists. And when we are trying to live a reality that is counter to our biology, that creates tremendous tension and disappointment and shame because we can't do it. Right? We can't be something other than what we are, and we're mammals. And even like what's fascinating to me is that mammals have made a survival strategy out of togetherness in a really complex social way. But even looking at amoebas, they've figured this out, right? That banding together when the pressure's on is a great way to survive. And so knowing that and teaching people that it's not about individuating to the point of not needing. Right? That is not what we're trying to do.
Is what you could interpret in a very loose way our past videos of saying we want to help people just foster this super rigid ability to sense themselves, which is true. And you have to make meaning with others because to some degree, my self-awareness is going to hit a cap. And
like, this is so interesting to me because there's something embedded in our language around the word I that makes us immediately hear singular. But it doesn't have to mean that. An I is a point of existence. It is a way of experiencing. So if I'm experiencing as an I, what that can mean to me is that I am a skin-boundaried organism that is next to other skin-boundaried organisms. But that doesn't have to mean that there is not tremendous interdependence, reliance, mutuality, meaning making, existing, so much so that I can't understand myself as an organism without understanding all of that interconnection.
Well, we talked about in the proprioceptive episode of like, sometimes my self goes beyond my physical corporeal body.
Yeah.
And like I extend and influence things beyond just this.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, sometimes I need to call that back and be
Right.
like, okay, that pole is 4 feet away. It's
Right.
not going to hit me.
Right.
But with humans, it's different. Now we have this zone between us where we can touch each other without ever touching each other.
Yeah. And that is intercorporeality.
Yes.
That, like what you just described, the ability to, as a human mammal, extend ourselves beyond our skin boundary. The way that we do that is actually, we have cells that do this. They're mirror neurons that experience in our own body what it feels like to be the other, right? And we also project our experience beyond our own body through things like motion,
energy,
right?
and motion.
That's right. Like we demonstrate our I to the rest so that they can have a mutual experience, and together we can make meaning of what this particular I is holding at that particular moment.
Yeah.
And so intercorporeality is perfectly described as the ability to extend ourselves beyond our own physical boundaries and receive something and internalize something that is not originally part of our own physical boundaries. And that happens a million times a day, and at a subconscious and sometimes conscious level.
Yeah. I've not talked to him, but I imagine this is like the champion like race that Dan Siegel is running. He just came out with another new book, or I think it's coming out, but all about his concept of we, me and we, which is like, I think when you say I, it is beyond just an individual.
Yeah.
It goes to that concept of, can I be seen as this I in connection with you,
right?
Which then creates like a we, but doesn't mean that I lose I.
No.
It means that it's a me and we.
Well, and there was never an I without the we, right? Like that cannot be, because of the nature of our development. We develop within a fluid environment that is completely housed in the we. Right? That like from the absolute moment that life begins, we are a we. And that happens physically, right? The cells of my babies are in my body, and my cells are in my babies' bodies for the rest of our lives. And I'm not just talking about genetic material, although that is true as well, right? But then even beyond that, once baby is now out of the physical holding environment, they are in the relational holding environment. And all of those interactions are literally wiring together their nervous system and creating the internalized schemas that become an I. Like there is no I that is not originally a we, right? And understanding that gives us so much insight into how healing can happen, how relationships can function, what boundaries are actually supposed to be.
Yes.
And I think there's just so much nuancing that we need to do around this, that it's not me and you, it's not my body and your body, but it also doesn't have to then go into dangerous terrain of my body belonging to another. Like that, we're nowhere near that, because all of that is a social construct and meaning that we have made together about feelings that have been had. And so understanding this actually provides a lot of liberation and a lot of nuanced understanding of what our organismic experience is and can be in relationship.
Yeah. In therapy, it feels very resonant that this is in line with some of the concepts we talked about with slowing down time and creating space, which is, can we make space in therapy to talk about how we're influencing each other?
Right.
And not in like a manipulative way, but in a way that our bodies are naturally and unconsciously going to organize and try to feed off one another to get needs met.
Yes.
And that's not a bad thing.
No, it's so natural.
And if we can own it, then we can like freely engage it with intention. But sometimes in therapy, it's just like, I feel this sometimes when I'm doing consultation, it's, we're playing a game and we have to outsmart the game or what the client system is protecting them from. we have to find our way. It's like, well, yeah, but that also feels like eerily close to like non-consensual relationships. What would it be like to just start open conversations about, hey, how are we interacting with each other?
Right.
And can we become aware of the patterns and ways that we help or not each other?
Or at the very least, even if it's not in the realm of helping, just impacting, right? Just influencing, like bumping up against each other and creating some kind of response or reaction in the other. That's the stuff that is just happening constantly. And our organisms are so highly and finely tuned to be mostly paying attention to that. As humans, our greatest threat and our greatest resources come from each other. And the kinds of things that we're able to do is because we figured out how to work together towards a common goal. And the way that we do that is through that constant monitoring of the me space, right? And how do I fit in this context of togetherness? And so the more that we're able to do that with awareness, the more that we can choose and work with our own biology so that healing feels like a natural flow. And it actually is more about creating something new together than about going back to some perfect original form that we were meant to be. I don't even believe that there is such a thing as that anyway.
Again, away from essence.
That's right. Yeah. That we are in this constant process in therapy of making something new together, whether it be meaning, whether it be neuronal pathways, which maybe those are kind of the same thing anyway.
Yes, yeah.
And so whatever we call it, it's always about what can we create together that is new, that gives this organism a different option to experience life with. So that's intercorporeality.
Yeah. I want viewers and listeners to like sit with the tension of what this concept means. Is that I think there could be an element of fear of like, you are impacted without your awareness by other people. And that can feel like, I think, especially in a Western world, like you're telling me I don't have total control over how the world impacts me.
Right.
It's like, yes, and it's not a yes, but it's a yes, I am telling you that.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you that with intention and awareness, you can work with the way the world is impacting you and set boundaries, set limits, engage in a healthy, fluid dynamic.
Yeah.
But I also think we have to reckon with the fact that we are influenced by our world. And that's real. Our clients are going to influence us.
So this is so fascinating to me because I feel like our field has sort of like got this idea and then did something really interesting with it. So here's what I mean. Early on in my career, I remember being in a CBT training and they made the comment that every time you hear your client say something like, they made me feel blank, you need to call them on it, right? And say, they didn't make you feel anything. You decided to feel XYZ. And at the time, I remember having this reaction of like, okay, I see your point. Yeah, okay, we're returning power, returning autonomy. You know, I don't have to feel a certain way. And yet something still felt off about it. Right. So in CBT, the idea is if I can reframe it and rephrase it to myself, then I will have a different reaction. So if somebody says something and it creates a response of frustration in me, I can reframe that and maybe the frustration will go away. Right. Here's the issue with that. The issue with that is that there is still this localization of power in the cognitive functioning only, right? So there's this idea of like there's two brains going at it, right? Like my brain is saying this and your brain is going to react to that in some way. And so if you can fix the contents of your thinking cognitive brain, then somehow all of this will follow suit, right? And
we'll give you information that's going to change your energy.
Yes. Yeah. And that notoriously, number one, takes a lot of energy to do. Number two is really not effective if you have to do it quickly because that takes a lot of like processing capacity. Number three is completely irrelevant if we're talking about trauma because that part of your brain is not online and available in those moments. And so it's
probably augmenting the shame spiral more.
Definitely.
You should just be seeing it like this.
But but why can't I? Right. And now even when I'm telling myself this over and over, I'm still having this reaction in my body, right? So that idea sort of held the essence of this awareness that maybe I can choose my reaction to things, right? But it kind of missed the boat. And it was like, good first try, but need to go back to the drawing board here. So what I would offer when we're talking about how do I kind of own my own self as this is my responsibility and I can't control another, and yet it's also true that we are deeply impactful and influential to each other. So what stance can we take that honors both of those realities and makes it useful? So what I'll offer is just the one that I found to be helpful. And this by no means is mine. This comes from a lot of Eastern somatic traditions, too many to name. It's been developed for many decades. But the idea that we can become an observer of our experiences without getting so attached to those experiences as the ultimate truth of something. Right? The sensation of anger is happening in my body. That's all that means, right? Now we can have a conversation or tell a story about who started it. Maybe it was you, right? Maybe that energy came in this direction and anger happened as a result of it. Is that your fault or is that my fault? What I'm saying is, why in the world is it useful to assign fault?
Yeah.
Right? Why is it useful to assign responsibility? Did you mean to make me angry? Maybe. Or maybe you were just busy surviving your own reality.
Yeah.
Right?
I have a whole interoceptive hunger that's shifting my presence in this space.
And I'm sleep deprived and sensitive.
Yeah.
Right? And so that idea of like who's responsible, right, is just I find it to be quite unuseful, right?
Yeah.
What feels more useful to me is what's happening.
Yeah.
Like what's real right now?
Yeah.
What's real is that you're hungry and I'm tired.
Yeah.
What's real is that you said something and my body clenched when you did. And I'm registering that feels like anger and a little bit of hurt, right? That's real. And can we do something about that? And that doing something doesn't have to begin with or ever involve assignment of blame or responsibility or even intentionality. Did you mean to? I don't know why that's relevant, right? I guess there could be times where it is, but the ability to track our own realities and be aware that the other person is having their own set of experiences and they are constantly mixing together to create a new reality. And we don't have to be in this game of chasing responsibility and blame. We can simply be in a state of observation about what is real right now.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. With the cognitive behavioral piece, I'm thinking like, the idea that we're making energy before we're making information before we're aware of the energy that's going into it. So information is energy in a form.
Yes.
In a formation.
Yeah.
So then what you're talking about is, can we slow down?
Right.
Can we be aware of the energy and then play around with what form do we want to put it in?
Right.
Like we could put it into, I just like, you clock me in the face because I made you angry. So that's a form. That's a form. And how would that influence both you and me?
Right.
And this ongoing relationship? Or what's some other forms we can play with?
Right.
And ask that question.
And that is like, if that was a session, that'd be really good therapy.
Oh, yeah.
Right? What if we just get out of that storytelling conversation around, did they mean to, did I mean to, who's to blame, who's in charge, who's responsible, and settle into this slow observation of what is and where is that energy happening in my body, emotionally. Maybe we notice what thoughts and beliefs are trying to emerge out of that. But that doesn't have to become the focus. If we stay with that energy, then I can decide, where do I want to put this?
Yeah. What energy is out here? What energy happened in here as a result of out there?
Yeah.
What do I notice as the threat? And then what's possible as my proprioceptive awareness of putting energy back into the space that's going to impact our relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like going through the senses into this like final nugget of all you are is relational.
Yes.
So it's going to be impacted and be impacting relationships.
So I'll give an example of just something that is like super real world
Mm.
and everyday experience that I feel like is very informed by this. So my daughter is 5.5, and she's currently in a phase of trying to figure out what strategy will work to have the maximum amount of control over her mother. Right? Normal, right?
Classic autonomy
That's
in
right.
industry.
We're in that phase, and I'm cognizant of it. And I'm also feeling all of my interesting reactions to her attempts to control, because she's quite sophisticated about it sometimes, and other times totally not sophisticated at all. So last night we're laying in bed, and with this in mind, that every time that I see a control strategy, it was originally an energetic impulse. And I was a little unclear at that point about what is the energy? On the surface, it looks like a desire for control, but that to me is not a primary need. And so I was very curious and ended up just asking her, I'm like, if you can think all the way back to before it begins, whatever it is that you're doing, which is usually lying and manipulating, what's the feeling that's happening in your body? And she's my kid, so she's used to talking this way. I wouldn't try this on a little kid that's never done this before, maybe. Although kids can sometimes do it better than adults.
Yeah.
And she was a little bit uncertain, but what she said was, I feel mixed up, right? And I'm like, does it feel like you want two things at once? Yes, right? So I'm like, okay, so it's a conflicting energy. Right.
Yeah.
So we talked about that for a while. And after, some back and forth conversation in 5-year-old language and me trying to figure this out, what we landed on together is that when she is attempting to control, the question that her body is holding is, how much does mommy love me?
Mm.
And so it's a test, right? If mommy will give me what I want, that means she loves me. If mommy will come right now when I call her, that means she loves me. And so it's this love hunger that, of course it is, because she's 5.5, and it's always love hunger, right? This love hunger that she's experimenting with the strategy of control to see, does that work? Do I get more love?
Do I influence another body?
Yes. Yeah. Can I control that body so that I have constant access to this love resource that I want? Does that work?
Mm-hmm.
And she's learning that it does not.
Yeah.
But we're also trying to negotiate together, what other strategies can she use that will get that love hunger met?
If that's an interoceptive need.
That's right. She's feeling that craving in the same way that I feel sleep hunger and you feel food hunger, right? So what I offered was, if you will tell me that you want to just sit down and cuddle with me, I will always say yes to that if I am in a space to do it. And even if I have to say in a few minutes, it will happen. And you'll have to sit with that hungry feeling for a little while I finish doing what I'm doing. But it will happen faster if you do it that way and tell the truth, because whenever we do it the other way, you and I end up arguing for 10 minutes and we don't ever get to the cuddling part anyway. And her little face was just this dawning awareness of I'm not getting what I want.
Yeah.
And maybe this will work. And this morning was, she was trying out the old strategies and the new strategies at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I about lost my mind. But we ended up cuddling, so it was fine. Yeah. But I feel like that awareness that we get so sophisticated in our stories and strategies that we forget to track the energy that it began with.
Yeah.
And when we can get to the root of it in that way and get back to the body-to-body negotiation that is always happening, it illuminates pathways to healing that we haven't seen before.
Yeah. 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 Freud talks about, at the end of his life, he talked about wild psychoanalysts who thought that the interpretation was the cure. And he talks about how, no, you have to make clients sit with the tension of the repressive, distorted path they're taking to get what they want is actually not giving them what they want.
Not at all.
It's inhibiting them.
Yeah.
And helping them to sit with that tension and then come into, I can impact other people differently.
Yeah. And that's not negotiated through story, right? It's communicated often through story.
Yeah.
But that is a body-to-body negotiation that is
Sitting.
always happening.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So our next video, we're going to attempt to show this body-to-body and give some ideas of how you might be able to take some of this into sessions, which is a little complicated, and we know that. We're going to talk about that.
Therapists are going to work body to body.
I know.
Clients.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm super comfortable with this. And, one of our conversations has been that we have to honor our different comfort levels. And there's always kind of, work your leading edge of risk, but don't do something that feels like it's so foreign that you're going to feel super weird doing it.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would offer is maybe before you try it with a client, try it with a friend.
Yeah.
Get a little bit more comfortable with it before you take it into a session. And when we try it with clients for the first time, number one, we're always tracking safety. And number two, I recommend that you try it with a client that you feel good with.
Yeah.
That, the relationship feels solid, stable, steady, and like it could take a little hiccup and still be okay in case it's weird at first.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Probably not first session.
Right. No, not hi, nice to meet you. Would you like to work body to body?
Did you know that your body influences mine and I influence yours?
That's right. Unless you're a somatic therapist and they're coming to you specifically for that. But most of us are seated talking therapists. So this is a new way of doing things.
Yeah.
So
cool. Well, thanks for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure to stay tuned for the next video. It should be published here pretty soon. So stay tuned. See you guys.